So welcome. My name is Meira Levinson. I'm the Juliana W. and William Foss Thompson Professor of Education and Society here at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And welcome to today's Education Now episode. Education Now is a webinar series designed to provide insights and strategies to shape equitable new approaches to challenges across the education sector. We're really glad that you're here with us today to think about how to help kids become skilled citizens. Just to let you know, we're going to have a conversation together for about the first 20 minutes or so, and then we are reserving the last 10 minutes for your questions, and you can submit your questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom screen anytime. You'll also find closed caption access there, and I actually encourage you to submit questions whenever they occur to you, because of course part of our process is we're sorting through them so that there's not like a wait time while I sort through them, is that we're going to be reviewing them as we go. So feel free to put questions in there and also turn on the closed captioning. All right, we have a lot to talk about today. So let me welcome our guests. We have three really phenomenal education thinkers and leaders today. Sarah Cole is the Assistant Principal of Literacy at the Social Justice School in Washington, D.C. It serves grades 5 through 8, and I'm really glad to have Sarah here. Eric Soto-Shed is a colleague of mine, lecturer on education here at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and a real leader in social studies education and civic education. And Jack Schneider is the Dwight W. Allen Distinguished Professor at the University of Amherst and also the Executive Director of the Beyond Test Scores project there. And many of you may know him also from his Have You Heard podcast and many public speaking and publishing events. And it's really thrilling to have all three here to think with us about basically democracy in the United States and the world, which I think no matter who we are, no matter what political position we have, no matter what our experiences are, I think that we can agree that democracy in the United States and around the world is under threat. And that the civic preparation and even the civic virtue of our fellow citizens matters. And so that's what we're here to think about today. And I want to invite you, Eric, to start us off, because I know that you and Jack have been working on a multi-phase research project looking at what students need to learn to become skilled citizens. And I'll note that when we're talking about citizens here, we are talking about people not only with the legal status of citizenship, but kind of with the social status of citizenship, right? Everybody who is living in this country has certain kinds of civic obligations and civic rights. And you define citizens quite broadly. So can you tell me about how you and Jack think about citizenship and about your studies and your findings so far?
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you for that introduction, Meira, and really defining citizenship, I think, in an inclusive, important way, in many of the ways in which Jack and I are thinking about it. And so what Jack and I have done in our study is that what you'll find nationally is that there is broad support for civic education. State across state are passing different sort of standards and mandates. But what does that civic education look like varies tremendously. And so what Jack and I sought out to do is to develop some curriculum ultimately that will be based on the work of skilled citizens. And what we're really doing is borrowing on a long tradition in education research where the disciplinary work we ask students to do in science, in history, and other classrooms are often informed by what very skilled people in those disciplines do. And so what Jack and I found as we began to embark on this project is to really name what are those key tasks that engaged citizens are doing. It's really hard to define because there's such a broad sort of swath of what civics can be. And so what we did sort of in our first phase of our research, and this is what we just published in the spring, was really begin to identify like what are the tasks that particularly engaged citizens are involved in. And so what we did is we surveyed 500 what we call sort of average citizens and 100 folks who have some sort of expertise in citizenship. And this could be folks that are elected local politicians, political science professors, folks that work for advocacy organizations. And we asked them a simple question: what are the tasks that skilled citizens are engaged in? And we got a litany of responses that we eventually coded and categorized into themes. 4 themes emerged. 2 really did with like collaboration and mutual aid. We call these interpersonal tasks. These can be things like helping others, giving advice, engaging citizens in your community. And another set of tasks under volunteering, so neighborhood beautification, giving to charity, that type of thing. The other two sort of broad themes we found were this idea of building an informed community. So this can be things like keeping up to date on current events, posting on social media in a very sort of savvy way. And last but not least, this category of tasks under political engagement. And this could be anything from community organizing, participating in the creation of local policy. So what we're planning to do now is, with this long sort of list of tasks we have, is we're going to identify a few where we're going to begin to engage folks in their thought process and the sort of the moves that they make, the intellectual moves they make when completing these tasks, and then begin to use that to inform curriculum that will eventually develop and work with teachers to do that. So that's sort of a broad sort of overview of what the study was about.
And just out of curiosity, Eric, did you find out, so as you were talking to the 500 ordinary citizens and then some like super citizens, did they agree on what expert citizens do, or did they have somewhat different visions?
So that was what was really interesting, is that we embarked on this looking sort of for like demographic differences across political lines, and differences between experts or the professional citizens and the ordinary citizens. And we found that these sort of four themes that we mentioned really ranked the top across all the differences. So that was actually really interesting in one of our findings.
That's great, thanks. So I know you mentioned that you will be developing curricula, and you haven't yet, since you're still in, the early stages of your research, but I know that, Sarah, you actually do bring this into practice already. And I'm curious, I think probably many of us do have pictures in our mind about how young people are helped to sort of practice the skills or virtues of expert readers or writers or scientists. Like, we can picture them doing experiments, or say being in literature circles or things like that. Can you share some of your own experiences about how you have worked with students, or how some of the teachers who you work with have worked with students to help them exercise civic skill and virtue?
Absolutely. So I really appreciate the work that Eric and Jack have done. When I was in the classroom, the most recently taught fifth graders, and my first year was told that I had to teach about the three branches of the government. I was teaching humanities. I signed up I was trained to be an ELA teacher, and I very intentionally chose that because I didn't want to have to teach social studies content. And my first year, I did not enjoy it. I don't think my students enjoyed the unit. And so I kind of had to ask myself, well, why is it important for students to be learning about the three branches? What difference do I want this to have in their lives? And what I came to is, like, I want them to be able to be empowered citizens, and I want them to have a sense of their agency within their citizenship. And so after that pivot, I was trying to establish what could be learning experiences that would really help students be able to internalize this information and want to be stronger citizens. And so I set them on a mission where, at the beginning of learning about the three branches, they also found out that over 90% of American adults can't name the three branches. And they also saw data around how young people don't vote in midterm elections. And so we set them on a mission to educate adults about the three branches, and to canvass young adults who went to a college campus, to canvass young adults to try to encourage them to vote in the upcoming election. And in order to do this, we read a lot of text about the three branches and learned about how the midterm election could affect each of the branches, so that they had an understanding of why this election even mattered and how the branches function. But we also brought in a lot of experts. So we brought in, I really like to try to bring in younger experts too. So we brought in a group of students who do canvassing work, high school students, and they trained our students on how to canvass, and we co-created a canvassing scripts for when we went out to the college. We also had people come in and train our kids on how to register voters. So this was actually the third year that I did it. When it wasn't an election year, that was their goal, was to try to increase the number of students being registered, but they were actively participating in the electoral process, and they reflected on it afterwards and wrote letters to their 18-year-old selves, and like begging their 18-year-old selves to vote and not be one of the young people who don't vote. But you could just really see the commitment, even with students who struggled to read. On the day when we were doing the field work and canvassing, there were students who couldn't read, who were like chasing people down to stop them, to be able to talk to them and get them to canvas. So they really had internalized the content and had really internalized the mission that they were on.
This is inspiring. And also I'm curious about sort of potentially the cautionary piece that just came up at the end when you're talking about students who are not on grade level with literacy, and they're spending their day out of school, chasing down college students, trying to get them to vote. How do you think about the relative importance of, say, spending this time out of school on, say, voter registration, as opposed to, say, the fundamental importance of building literacy skills? I know a lot of people have concerns about civic engagement and activism work as being work that distracts from the core academic purposes of schools.
Yeah, so I would argue that from my first year of teaching the three branches to my second year, when I had the kids on this mission, their engagement and level of commitment to reading the text about the three branches, to learning about the three branches, skyrocketed. They were motivated in order to be able to convince and teach adults about the three branches, they needed to know that information themselves. And so they were really motivated to try to learn and to have discussions. And it's also about being really strategic about what scaffolds and things you put in place to make sure that all students can access it. But when you have structured your learning in a way where students have a strong sense of purpose, you really see the motivation increase. And I think civics provides a really beautiful opportunity for that, because you can have students practicing their literacy skills, but in a way that's going to meet an authentic need within their community, which is what being a citizen is all about.
Thanks, Sarah. This actually provides us, I think, a really useful way to pivot to you, Jack, because I know that you think that although Sarah was kind of forced into this work, finding herself having to teach social studies, we were just talking about literacy and ELA and so forth. And I know that you think that work with young people presents opportunities to help them do things related to skilled civic involvement, like way past just, say, social studies classes. Can you talk to me more about that?
Yeah, sure. I think when you look at the top 4 civic activity themes that Eric named from our work, only one of them really seems to have a clear classroom home, right? So political engagement, I think, is a natural fit for the social studies classroom. But then the other 3, I think, there are questions about, well, where do these live in the curriculum? Where do you learn how to engage in interpersonal tasks, right? Where do you build an informed community? Where are there opportunities to volunteer? I think because those don't have a clear home in a particular classroom, that they then encourage us to think about, where could this happen any place in a school? And on the one hand, that's a major challenge, right? How do we try to embed these foci across the curriculum, across everyday activities in a school? But then I think on the other hand, the opportunities are endless. And I think it starts with recognizing that schools have a civic purpose, right? That I'll speak only for this country. There may be people joining internationally, and say that public schools are funded by our tax dollars for a reason, because we all benefit. And I'm not going to exclude private schools here. Many private schools have a shared civic purpose here, but speaking specifically about the schools that 90% of our students attend, right? That these are not free private schools with idiosyncratic or ideological missions, right? They're civic resources that strengthen communities. And I think that if that's a part of how we understand the mission of schools, then I think the opportunities begin to reveal themselves pretty clearly, because every day there are chances to prepare young people for civic life. And that doesn't necessarily mean voting. Like, certainly it means voting. And I think the case that Sarah talked us through is really inspiring. But I would say, let's also then think about what it means to prepare young people to live alongside other people who may not be like them, right? To form loose ties, to work together on community tasks, to make decisions, to help each other, right? That kind of sounds like kindergarten to me. And I mean that in the best possible way, right? And I think that can happen across a school's programming.
So this gets us, I think, really centrally into a concern that is particularly ripe in the United States, although is also arising elsewhere around the world, where as we think about, so what does it mean for students to develop the social emotional skills and dispositions to work together? What kinds of volunteer projects might students be working on? What ways in which, what are the kinds of community challenges that they might identify and decide they want to work on? This can seem very politicized and quite ideologically divided. So let's stick with you for a minute, Jack. How do you advise teachers or schools to take productive action in this context, where if students identify a problem with water quality, or even with, voter registration, right? Voter registration has now become a very politicized activity, where, you're not going to get some group of parents or community members or school board members or whatever up in arms about you're inappropriately politicizing or indoctrinating kids.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And it comes up basically every time Eric and I end up talking about this work with people, is the concern, how do you even do this in the year 2023?
Mm-hmm.
How do you do this in the context of a country that seems to be tearing itself apart? I think it's an impossible question to answer. The way that I tend to answer it, and Eric and Sarah may have better answers to this, is that I think, first of all, if we start with young people and actually enable them to have voices in this process, so that it's quite clear that they are not being manipulated, indoctrinated, brainwashed, or whatever else you would like to describe it as, right? That they are in fact being empowered to engage as novices. And Eric alluded to the nature of this kind of research. It's often framed as novice expert research, where you take what experts know and you begin to build those habits of mind or skills with novices, and to frame students as novices in this process who actually need to practice and who can be active agents in that process themselves. I think that's really important.
Mm-hmm.
And I think another is that if we begin to think more expansively about what it means to be an engaged citizen in this very capacious understanding of what a citizen is, right? We're not talking about a kind of legalistic definition, that there are all sorts of ways to do this work in a less politicized manner. So, if we want students to be able to live alongside other people, for instance, I think one of the things that we need to teach them is how to empathize with others. I don't think that's a particularly politicized habit of mind, right? So Meira, I know that you know Hunter Gelbach, who has done a lot of work on social perspective taking. He's at Johns Hopkins University right now, right? So social perspective taking in a nutshell is, I'm going to assume that you are not a total monster. Let me try to step into your shoes for a minute and try to figure out why you're doing what you're doing. That can be an incredibly productive start for conversations where we actually have differences in opinion, perhaps even ideological differences. Young people tend not to have those in as deeply set a manner. And I think that framing some of this work as being, truly nonpartisan in nature, and some of it really is, can be a nice companion to dealing with tougher stuff where young people themselves can be really the drivers of the action.
Great, thanks, Jack. Sarah, I see you nodding along. What's going through your mind as you're nodding along?
Yeah, I'm thinking about some of the work that we're doing at my school currently, where I lead our ELA team, and what Jack was mentioning about really allowing students to kind of be in the driver's seat really resonates. So last year I was supporting the 7th grade team in turning their curriculum into like another mission for students. And they were learning all about social and medical epidemics. And at the same time in Washington, D.C., we've had really high gun violence happening. And in particular, a lot of young people being killed. And some of those young people, our students knew. And so then and they were coming into the school upset about this and heard about this. And so then we decided, let's study gun violence as a case study of a social epidemic. And ultimately, the students were able to co-design interventions to prevent gun violence amongst young people in DC and presented at a gun violence prevention rally right outside of the building where city council and the mayor work. And this for them was, I think, even a healing centered civics experience because they had the opportunity to address a challenge that had caused trauma within our community. And beyond that, I'm also really resonating with the point around empathy.
Actually, wait, before you move to empathy, I'm curious, in your work on gun violence as a social epidemic with young people, did you all also talk about constitutional limitations and Second Amendment rights and say Heller, things, or no?
We didn't get too much into that because it was an ELA class. It was more so focusing on the data in Washington, D.C. So we were also doing some math, focusing on the data in Washington, D.C. and analyzing some of the policies that had already been created to try to address it. But it was pretty, we didn't even enter the debate around the right to own a gun. We were just like, given this current circumstance, how can we make sure that we are keeping our kids alive and kids aren't being harmed by gun violence?
Got it. Thanks. That's really helpful. And sorry, keep going about empathy, and then I want to turn to Eric.
Yeah. So on the route of empathy, I keep thinking obviously through the lens of ELA, as I am I work in ELA, but I think about when you think about civics, some questions you could ask yourself are like, as an ELA teacher, what stories need to be uplifted in our community that could be helpful in any way, and have your students write narratives, do empathy interviews with those community members. Some of our students right now are reading Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief, which kids love, and they're learning about what does it mean to be a hero, and they're going to go out and find unsung heroes in the community, both outside of our school and in our school, to be able to, one, build our community's awareness and understanding of what a hero is, but two, be able to put in a spotlight these folks who are doing amazing, impactful things. So in doing that work, they are going to be working on their writing skills, but they're also going to learn how to become empathetic listeners and how to celebrate other stories and tell other people's stories and be able to share those stories in a way that'll make a difference. So there are lots of civics and literacy skills that are going to be tackled there. And it's really just thinking about what are those skills that we want them to learn and how can we tie them all together?
So that takes us actually into one of the chief questions that we've seen come in from the audience, Eric, which is about the measurement of civic skills. So we've heard both Sarah and Jack talk about development of listening, writing, and reading skills, the development of interpersonal and social and emotional skills, development of skills through getting out into the world and also within the classroom, et cetera. And as you continue your research and then also think about curriculum development, do you have a way to say measure skill building in this area and to measure how well student civic commitments and capacities are actually improving over time?
I mean, absolutely. I would say that gets at the heart of what we're trying to do, particularly in this second phase of the research. And really that is to sort of look at, from a qualitative standpoint, like what are the specific moves? What do these look like? How can we describe them? Right. And then look at novices engaged in these tasks and begin to describe what does a novice look like. From there, we believe you can get some really rich descriptions that could ultimately form the basis for some criteria that you could use to measure and assess what does civic acts look like in particular tasks. With that being said, I think it's very important to always put the caveat out there that you can't measure everything of importance, right? And that civics is a richly, deeply complicated set of things that people are doing. So the idea is not that we would have, here is the measurement that will capture the totality of civic expertise, but begin to sort of carve out pieces and bits and say like, yes, these are actually meaningful things. And we can have some very research-based explicit measurements of what it looks like to grow in that area.
And are you going to say, as you develop these measures, run these measures by people from different political positionalities and see, like I know, for example, that Educating for American Democracy, which is a a sort of curricular framework has been very intentionally a bipartisan or really multi-partisan initiative. And I know that you said that you sampled people in your interviews from across the political spectrum. Do you think that your measures will also sort of hold up across the political spectrum?
That's our goal. Just to clarify, we surveyed folks across different political perspectives. We haven't done interviews yet. We're going to, but Jack and I are. That's kind of, I think, at the core of what we're trying to do. We're trying to get sort of to this empirical sort of undergird of civic sort of thinking, and begin to say that there are some things that folks do, whether you're a conservative person trying to advance X or a very progressive person trying to advance Y, that there's certain moves and certain things that you're doing, or really try to identify in those. Recognizing that will just be a subset of sort of what it means to do civics well, but we think it's a really important one to base a lot of curriculum on.
Great, thanks. Jack, we've had an audience question about like how, about global civic awareness as opposed to just say focus in the United States. Does your work address that in any way?
Not yet, but I think it's hard to talk about the idea of citizenship without thinking of that largest of these concentric circles, right? That we are members of our very local communities, we're members of our statewide communities, we're members of our national community, and we're members of the international community. And I think, you asked a question earlier about the politicization of particular understandings of citizenship. Right. And that needs to be taken into account here as well, where there certainly are people who don't view themselves as members of an international community and would, make a strong case against, what they would call globalism. And so I think that actually makes an even stronger case for trying to get down to what are the habits of mind that skilled citizens, right? People who are engaged in the civic process. What are the habits of mind that they use, rather than so much of the way that those of us who are interested in this topic have approached it is to think about, well, what's the information that needs to be offered to people? And I think we're just trying to add one more piece to this puzzle, where we're trying to say, there are these skills that can be practiced. We don't know what they all are yet, but that may be one of the ways of getting through what is essentially a political logjam, such that maybe the way to get young people to think of themselves as members of international communities is not actually by teaching about the International Criminal Court and the UN and, large global problems like climate change, all of which would be contested by political ideologies. Thanks.
So Sarah, I think that this will probably be ending with you. You talked, Jack, about skills, but you also, I think all three of you have been focused on dispositions. And one of the audience questions that's come in is about hope and the importance of believing in one's ability to make a difference. I'm curious, say, thinking back to the gun violence project that you described, that can feel quite hopeless in that, you can do a lot of work and then there's the next school shooting that happens, or the next shooting, down at the corner store or around, right? And so I'm curious how, in the face of huge civic challenges, climate change is another one, do you see students having a sense of hope, and do you maintain a sense of hope without it being some false promise?
Yes, so I think it's really important to, one, make it clear to students that whatever it is that they are working on, there are other folks working on it too, that they are not alone in that work, and that there most likely has been like generations of folks working on whatever that issue is. So I think that's one important thing to help students know, knowing that you're surrounded by a community who's working on this thing can be really helpful. I also think it's important to try to contextualize the impact that they can make. I do think that it can be easy for educators to assume that kids can't make any impact. And so I do want to really push educators to think deeply about what that impact can be and trust that young people can make an impact right now. But I think being able to name what the impact is and naming what where is the continued growth? Like, what is the continued opportunity? I'm thinking about our 7th graders who went to the rally last year. Now they're 8th graders and they're running to their 7th grade teacher asking, when are we going back to the rally? We get to go too, right? That was an experience where, yeah, they had some hard days. They had days full of tears when they were being impacted by this challenge. But when they went to that rally, they saw all of these other, hundreds of other people that were also working on it. So I think letting them know the community that they're a part of and also contextualizing the impact, trusting that they can make an impact and contextualizing that impact are important steps.
Thanks. That sounds like it takes us back, in fact, to one of these core civic domains that Jack and Eric talking about, which was recognizing and having the capacity to work in collaboration with others. Thanks so much. And thank you to all three of you, Sarah Cole, Eric Soto-Shed, Jack Schneider. This has been a fascinating conversation, very short, but really thought-provoking. And so I'm really grateful to you. And for all of our Education Now audience, thank you for joining us. And I hope that you'll join us at future ones.